All right, I think we're going to start this off. Okay, welcome everybody. I hope that you're enjoying your morning. Thank you for joining us today as we discuss today's topic on program acceleration tactics for new and growing programs. So we have a marvelous lineup of industry-leading guests here today to give us their insights on how their world-class programs are gaining momentum through their process, reporting, and leadership involvement. So I am thrilled today to welcome back our veteran UPLEVEL co-host, Ellen Barnes-Fiffner from EVP Consulting. So thank you so much for being here with us today and facilitating another webinar. We are very thrilled to have you back. So if you wouldn't mind going ahead and introducing yourself for those of you who don't know you, and just providing some information about what you're doing in this space and about you.
Allie, thank you. It's really a privilege to be back to work with the team here. I'm a consultant globally to briefing programs, and I help with processes, benchmarking, consulting, and training. And I'm a former member of the ABPM advisory board, and I've published 25 plus articles about briefing programs.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ellen. And then joining us today as our panelists, we have Renee Nabilski. She is the director of the Global Experience Program at Crestron. Thank you so much for being here, Renee. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and providing our audience a little bit of information about you and your company.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor. I am the director of the Experience Program at Crestron. I've been part of ABPM for about 16 years through a handful of different experience programs. And just really happy to share whatever I can. So thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. And next we have Claudia Luck. She's the Executive Briefing Program Manager at Cloudflare. If you wouldn't mind saying hello and introducing yourself, we would love to hear.
Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be joining the panel today. My name is Claudia Luck. I'm our Executive Briefing Program Manager at Cloudflare. I am brand new to the briefing world. I joined the briefing world as well as started the executive briefing program here at Cloudflare about 2 years ago. So I'm a bit thrilled to learn from our panelists here as well as other members of the ABPM community over the last 2 years, and excited to chat a bit more today about some of my learnings.
Wonderful, thank you. And before I pan this over, I did want to just share Crestron's a few images that we had on here, just so you guys can kind of get a visual of what their centers are looking like. Let me go ahead and share this. So you guys can see that. So the Los Angeles and our New Jersey locations here. Thank you. All right. Okay. So before I hand it over to Ellen, I just want to get the audience involved. We just wanted to display a poll question and have you guys give some input. The question I'll be displaying is, where are you in the development of your current program? So let me display this poll question and get everybody's feedback here. So planning to start a program, they're just starting off, you're a few years in, looking for what's next. Well established, but ready to revamp or rebrand. And if there is another choice, feel free to drop that in the chat box so we can see what you guys are doing. Give you guys a few more minutes. It looks like currently about 57% are just starting off. 13% are a few years in. 22% are well established, but looking to maybe revamp or rebrand. And then 22% is other. So thank you everybody who participated. Go ahead and share these results here for you. Perfect. Okay, thank you, everybody. I did want to add that in addition to hearing these valuable insights from our thought leaders, we do encourage all of you to ask questions throughout the webinar. So please feel free during the whole entire webinar to submit some questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom portion of your screen. We'll definitely try to answer all of the questions as they come in. So that's all from me. Ellen, I just wanted to pass it over to you so you can start off with the subtopic questions for our panelists.
Well, thank you, Allie. I was delighted to see the results of the poll because you are in the right place. We have a panel between Claudia and Renee who have been with established programs, working on brand new programs, and everything in between. But I want to talk about the need to have questions asked. Thank you, Ellie, for mentioning that. But this is a special challenge and a shout out to all of you who have new programs. You have fresh eyes. We'd love to hear what your questions are because I'm sure we're going to all learn from them. And those of you who established programs, we always welcome your input. I know many of you have award-winning programs. So, executive support is the #1 world-class characteristic. You look at any list of the world-class characteristics for briefing programs, and it's #1. And for those of you who are not familiar with the world-class characteristics, it's a blueprint or a map for how to build a best-in-class briefing practice. And it's published by the ABPM, and it's just recently been revised because of all the hard work and the learning that the community shares. We're all learning together, and the ladder we keep climbing together. But what I wanted to point out is that for those of us who stay up late thinking about briefing programs or wake up early thinking about briefing programs, we have struggled figuring out what is the one differentiator that is between a program that's thriving and doing great and one that just continues to struggle. And it's not the staff, it may or may not even be facilities. It's all about the executive support. So I think this is an incredibly important topic. So I'd like to start us off by asking Claudia first, in her very new program, and you've been there a little over 2 years now, what is the role of executive support in your new program, and how has that role evolved in the time you've been there, the 2 years?
Yeah. So as I mentioned in my intro, I joined Cloudflare about 2 years ago with the whole goal of establishing an executive briefing program. Nothing really formally had existed from a programmatic perspective before. Probably unique to Cloudflare, I was brought in under the customer success organization. Our chief customer officer had come in from a previous organization that had a very mature and robust executive briefing program and recognized this as a strong need within Cloudflare as we're growing and accelerating within the market. So kind of that was a big part of coming into the table was I didn't have much. I had kind of an wide open field for me to work in. And Ellen, as you mentioned, I think getting that executive support was #1 for me to start establishing this program. Our leadership team, I think of almost as like my #1 customer of the executive briefing program. They're the ones that are lending the support, whether that's as discussion leaders, their involvement, or as financial support. But they're also the ones trickling down the importance of the executive briefing program to the rest of their teams, right? Their teams are also joining me as discussion leaders. Their teams are the sales teams who are bringing executive briefings to the table and pushing them through the process. And so I think a key part of my first 5-6 months of building out this program was sitting down with leadership, educating them on what was an executive briefing program. Leadership, if you ask them, they said, well, we've been doing executive briefings for forever. I'm an executive. I've briefed our customers and our prospects before. How is this different? And so you really have to educate them on what does it mean to have a program now supporting this type of initiative? What does that mean for both the process, back-end process, as well as the spaces and the facilities assistance as well, and what that customer experience looks like from start to front. And so I think so sitting down with them, understanding, educating them, but then also understanding where the gaps were in the current system and what had been done before that was working and wasn't working. So you can continue on that trend and not change, the things that were working, right? Let's not recreate the wheel if we don't have to. And so a lot of it is understanding the value, not only that you're delivering to your end customers, but the value you're bringing to the internal organization, whether that's kind of improvements in the process, improvements in organization and scheduling, improvements in the customer experience as we think about a team who can really help facilitate that from start to end. So I think making sure you're educating your executive team, but then also seeing it from their lens and putting the business value in their perspective is really, really important.
Claudia, you've given us a lot of information there. And so during those first 6 months, you had all these conversations, but you've been there over 2 years now. So what's the cadence of meeting with them? What are the things they want to know from you now?
Yeah, good question. So yeah, obviously kind of establishing myself and establishing this program from the get-go from an awareness perspective. And now it's really about, all right, what are their expectations of this program? What are their needs? I think that varies depending on what leader you're speaking to. A revenue leader versus a marketing leader versus our product team are all going to have different metrics or information that they care about. I think at the end of the day, I'd highlight two things. One, really creating an executive sponsor internally is important. And you need to think strategically about who that executive sponsor is or how many you have. Cloudflare is a somewhat small organization compared to many of you on the call. And our co-founder and COO, Michelle Zatlin, it was operated as our executive sponsor and was able to, and still operates as our executive sponsor, but was able to kind of push that message as a cultural message, as a process change, as a new program across the leadership team, and make sure that was widely spread. So I think identifying your executive sponsor, keeping them updated on key learnings, what's working, what's not, keeping them involved in the program as well as much as possible, so they feel like they're a part of the program team. And then I think, Ellen, to your last point, right? It's then making sure that you're meeting with the right leadership to understand what are their needs in terms of reporting, what do they care about, and how often do they care to see it? I currently work on a quarterly reporting schedule for the majority of our leadership team. That's what they like. But I customize some of that reporting based on what's important for them, what they think of as key success. Our product team cares about insights and customer sentiment towards and how our products are growing. Our revenue team cares about pipeline and direct numbers. And so making sure that reporting is tailored for them.
Thanks. That's a great amount of advice, and it's spot on, I think. Well, let's shift now and talk to Renee, who's managed 4 different programs. I understand that Crestron has spaces globally, but they don't have a program. So you've been brought in to establish a strategic briefing program. So in other words, the parade has left town and you're now trying to get out in front. Is that right?
That's very accurate. Yes. When I came on board, spaces were already in existence. No cohesive leadership of those spaces, though. No real programmatic strategy for how things were measured or what the standards were going to be in terms of how the spaces looked, but also how they operate. And so for me to come in, part of my my connection to leadership was the desire for them to have a true program, but also, if I can echo Claudia, to educate them on what a true program is. The fact that we do have world-class standards, that's not just something that I made up, that there is this document of world-class that all of us crazy briefing people try to adhere to as much as possible or adapt to what we can and cannot do within our programs. So I'm still in my first year, and it is a lot of education. It is a lot of conversation of what our benchmarks can be today versus tomorrow and as we move forward. I'm also not looking to take on everything at once. As you mentioned, the parade's already gone. I have to catch up as best as possible. But having done this for a while, I know that I can't do everything at once. And so taking on one location at a time, if possible, when it is a number of possibilities, what are the achievables today? How can I make success in this location versus that one? And being able to drive that success to be able to get more leadership and overall corporate support. Oh, yes, this is great. I want this in my location too. Great. Well, I need you to do these things so that you can receive those things. And having that kind of conversation is also really important.
So given your experience, if somebody was brand new to the profession and has just been given the keys to a space and said, go get a briefing program, what are some things that you've done in the past that are kind of your secret sauce for developing executive trust and support?
Communication is key in my mind. what communication in the language that they best understand as well. And that's going to be different, not just by every company, but every department. Understanding what their metrics might be, how they want to absorb data, what, as Claudia said as well, what success looks like to them individually. Someone told me when I was just starting out that you can't manage a person, you can't manage a role, you have to manage a person. I feel the same way about my leaders, about my executive sponsors. I can't deliver them all the same speech. I need to really customize to make sure that what I'm trying to convey is being heard in a way that resonates best to them. Otherwise, I'm just speaking for my own benefit, not for theirs.
I think it's a great insight that both of you shared, and probably not an insight that many of us had in the early days. It took us a longer time than it's taking you to get there, and that is different roles, different responsibilities want different information. And you both are expressing that, and it's worth noting. So, one of the things that we find out that's just incredibly important is automation, because it enables us to show up with the same set of numbers everybody else is working with. So Renee, what automation do you have in place? And can you explain some of the benefits and challenges of your current tools?
Absolutely. And I'll actually take a slight step back there. So when I was discussing joining into this company, I asked specifically about what kind of tools, tracking tools were in place already as part of my interview process. I've been doing this for long enough that I know that I live or die personally by the numbers. And so I wanted to know what was in place. And in doing so, found out pretty early on that nobody liked what was in place. So that was one thing that when we talked about what a program really is and the expense at which there would be, right? How expensive our programs can be. That was one thing that I talked about early on, even in my interview process, and started on as soon as I came on board. I quickly learned that the company survives off of Salesforce, and therefore I wanted to speak that same language, have a tool that works in or lives in Salesforce. I involved my Salesforce team, I involved my data management team, and together we selected VisitOps as the tool that we're using because it lives in Salesforce and it was something that they were very comfortable in moving forward with. It admittedly takes a while to be able to get that point, right? To be able to get through whatever your security processes are and all of that. But the effort is worth it, because I quickly went from, hey, here's a vague Excel sheet of how many visits we think we had in this given time frame, to, okay, well, this is how many visits we had, and these are how many certain titles of importance we've had, and these are how many dollars through opportunities we think can come through the door. But this is also our upsell opportunities that were created from the events itself that we can say, we had some influence over. And then also, oh, by the way, these are the presenters that we're looking at, or discussion leaders that have been coming in often. And these are the verticals that we are starting to talk about. Again, not everybody wants all of that data, but I can take all of that data and create the story or convey the story to the right people based on what they're looking for. So now when I'm speaking to leaders about success of program, I can do so in multiple locations using the metrics that they are already familiar with in a tool and format that they are already familiar with. That's power. That's being able to successfully communicate. That's where we can start to show real return on investment. That's where you win.
Thank you. That's a great answer and great response, and so insightful. So just everybody knows VisitOps is part of the Nexus suite of offerings.
Yes.
And one of the advantages is that it really does completely integrate as an app with the CRM, in this case, Salesforce. And what I like about that is you're not walking in with some other numbers, because the minute you're in a meeting, particularly with executives, and you have to start explaining where your numbers came from, it's over. So that gives you that power to have those stories and convincing results. Claudia, one of the things that I think is ironic is that the new programs have the smallest staff and maybe just one person and has the least amount of automation. It's cruel, I think, but it's usually the truth. So what processes have you put in place? Have you started your program now? And what's your vision for automation for your program short term?
Well, Ellen, I'm going to clip that quote and send it off to my leadership team so that they're well aware. No, I think everything that Renee said was music to my ears. I think one of the learnings that I've had in the last 2 years, being new to the executive briefing space and having to build something from the ground up, is one, ABPM has been an incredible resource. I've very politely borrowed / stolen a lot of the resources that are on that page to help build out my initial process. I think per Renee's point of, I didn't ask those questions at the beginning. We were building something from the ground up. I didn't really know the importance of having a tool and having automation. And I think as I've come to learn in the last 2 years, you can make it work. I think there's, a lot of this for Cloudflare in particular was, let's prove the financial benefits of this, and then let's talk about kind of the additional financial support that would come for an automation tool. And so again, if a tool is what's holding you back from starting, start. I think you need to prove value, whether that's in, quantitative numbers that you might get through automation or through storytelling that you can really build up and showcase to your leadership. That's really important. But Ellen, to your point, I didn't start with a tool. We started very grassroots with Google Forms and spreadsheets and just trying to get folks to come through the program to cement the process. Really, an important key for me was, all right, how do we streamline point A to point Z or point Z to make sure that everything runs seamlessly and smoothly, that I'm understanding what everyone's roles and responsibilities is in the overall process, so that we can keep it smooth and essentially execute as quickly as possible or as quickly as needs be. And so really, process was a key important part of this. We've since migrated slightly, where I was previously working in Google Forms and spreadsheets. We've actually built a homegrown tool within Salesforce, our CRM tool, to, as Renee's point, process is a part of it, right? But we want to make sure we're speaking the language of our revenue leaders and our teams, which is all in Salesforce. How do we create a streamlined process for our sales rep so that the tool they're working in 24/7 is also the tool where they can help, request briefings and understand what the briefing process is. But then also we can tie back to numbers, right? Show the ROI, show what impact we're having within our accounts. My goal for automation, I think I've come a long way from where I was on day one of July 2021. We've come a long way since then, but I think there's more to go, right? I'm still a team of one. As I think about growth and acceleration of our program, that really means investments in resources, whether that's personnel, locations, or tools. I think tools is one that I think is going to be highly important. And so building that automation to allow the administrative burden to pass off from me and onto a tool that's set up to do that, I think can, for many of you who are starting off programs, you recognize that can free up your day to focus on the more strategic impact that you can have in executive briefings.
And that's a key part of your business case for getting funding for these tools. Thank you again. With both of your permission, I want to shift gears. We all want to know this now, because even though it's now March, it just happened, but for many of us, we're in our first quarter of the new fiscal year. For some, it might be slightly different. So what's keeping you up? What are going to be, Renee, I'm going to start with you. What are your goals for the program this year?
My largest goal, my most important goal this year is to open my Manhattan facility. For those who have opened new facilities, you know how much that keeps you up at night, and it certainly does for me at this time. Whether it be getting permitting and or negotiating design with different voices because everyone has an opinion from different departments, or learning both learning how to tell your corporate story as well as teaching others how to tell the next version of your corporate story. All of those things are overwhelming and important and very time consuming. So that is my biggest and most important goal. But having said that, as we all know, we are usually small programs doing multiple things at the same time. And so I can't just focus on Manhattan. I have a handful of others. One goal for the first part of this year has been getting my LA location up and running on its feet, which I am actually here today. I'm an East Coaster, but I'm in LA today. And the photos that were shown just earlier were taken yesterday because I just finished off the experience room finally for this location. Certainly not done, certainly edits that have to be made, but a huge success that I was able to do that. And then there are other locations that I want to be able to integrate or uplift, whether it be bringing locations that we have existing onto our booking tool, which not every location is yet. As I said, I'm tapering as to who is allowed on that booking tool, but also making sure that when I invite people to come on to that, I'm also getting a little bit more visibility in return, or a little bit more of our storyline cohesively directed in those locations as well. I don't have staff in every location. I really only have staff in 2 locations right now. So being able to take all of that on. And then the last piece is being able to, Crestron is a really interesting company in our diversity of product. We actually have a commercial thread, a residential thread, a hospitality thread, as well as a lighting thread. And I sit in a position to be able to work with all 4. And my hope is that this year, that cohesiveness will also convey better in our spaces. It is segmented today, and the goal is to be able to have those locations where multiple stories can happen. New Jersey and Manhattan will be the first of those. And I hope that we are able to convey that in other locations as well. So lots of lofty goals all at the same time.
Well, we're going to want to hear how they all go.
Absolutely.
Claudia, the same question for you. It's your first quarter, new year. What are the goals you have for your program?
Yeah, well, I think I'd start off with, Renee mentioned this earlier, when you're just starting or you're in kind of the early phases of growth, you really have to think strategically about what are you biting off, right? What can you as one individual person or one individual team manage? And so don't bite off more than you can chew. And so one thing I've, and I say that in the sense of, I know Renee's talked a lot about kind of her spaces and her facilities. Cloudflare really hasn't centered, or I haven't centered a lot of focus around our executive briefing centers. We have non-traditional EBCs. We've really thought about this as we're bringing a program to existence, and I'm going to work with my office team, facilities teams, and design teams and others to have then the office experience or the visitor experience to our offices help support that. But on that note, I think my big goal for 2023 is growth. Last year was my first year of a full year of this program. Very fortunately, we had some great success that came out of it. And so there's a lot of buy-in internally for this program and for continuing to execute on this program. And so I think that means a couple things. As I mentioned, financial resources coming my way, hopefully to grow the team, to build new tools and automation, or build tools into the program to help build that automation in. Additionally, thinking about global coverage as well. So I kind of very strategically, or actually, I'll take that back. When I first launched this program, I really did think of it as a global program, and strategically, after some trial and errors, learned to kind of scale that back. I had bitten off more than I could chew as one individual person. And so I've really focused the last year on supporting the Americas region And so I'm looking at this year of how I can better support our global regions in Europe and Asia Pacific, Australia, et cetera, and making sure that we're providing that same benefit. I'm providing the same benefit as the program manager to those regions. They're reaping those same benefits, but then ultimately that we're consolidating this into streamlined reporting for our leadership team, who can have a centralized view of what's going on across the globe, both in our executive briefing spaces and in our offices, but also if we think about executive briefings, period, whether they're virtual, in person, or hybrid. And then I think the last thing I'll say too is, the other big issue or pillar for me in terms of growth is really aligning with sales leadership. We have a new head of revenue. We have a lot of new initiatives in the company in terms of how we're going to market with our products. I want to make sure the executive briefing program helps support that wherever it can. But additionally, we're also resegmenting a lot of our customer base and our prospect base into different types of segments. And so another thing too is to how to align with those segments. So we really are focusing on our high growth, high potential accounts that can see the most impact from executive briefings, and making sure that the majority of focus is going there. So again, you're not spreading yourself too thin by being an open door policy, and being a little bit more strategic about thinking about where's the biggest impact that you can have within the organization.
That's a list.
It's a long list. Wish me luck.
We're for you. We want to hear how it goes. I got
a
note here that we have a question or two.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, the first question, and either of you can answer or both of you can answer. What is the best way to advertise or announce a company-wide that your center exists and that they look forward to welcoming other stakeholders to host their strategic customer briefings? So I guess the best
I can start with that if you'd like, Claudia.
Sure.
So, I think for one, it absolutely depends upon your company and what tools your company has access to or usually uses. I try to focus first on wherever my sellers, I always see my sellers as my first customers. Wherever their eyeballs are going to be, that's where I want to be. And I see them as my first line customers because they're the ones bringing customers in. If I don't have their buy-in, I don't have anything. So I do a lot of grassroots work. So for example, even this week, right, I just finished the Uplift of LA. And so on Monday, I have a call. I will be part of the sales team call for this region to talk about how to use the space, how to book the space. Hey, by the way, please don't use just Outlook to book the space because I can't track you that way. All of those kinds of things. And why we have done things a certain way. Hey, I want this to be successful. Let's work together on doing that. This is how it can be successful. We also internally use a marketing tool or education tool called HighSpot. I have a spot or a page in HighSpot dedicated to all of my facilities. That page includes any announcements that I might have, training on how to use the booking tool. But what I found is creating my own newsletter would be noise. The HighSpot newsletter is where people are actually looking at things because there are updates about a variety of programs. And it's already being done. I don't have to fill content every week or every month. There's already stuff there, so I can just jump into it when I have an update, whether it be a new location, a new piece of tech, a new process, whatever the case may be. And then the last piece is probably the hardest in most companies, and that's getting on that all hands call, whether it be all hands corporate or sales all hands or marketing all hands or all of the above. It can be very difficult in some companies. I have been extraordinarily lucky in this company that I sit just underneath the CMO, and he is very excited about me taking part in those kinds of calls with whatever updates we can do. And so intimidating as it may be, my first one, my guidelines were wow them. And that's it. That was a little bit open, but I've been able to talk about some of the improvements. And even when my CMO talks about his updates, he includes a slide about our improvements. That has given us a ton of visibility. It's not immediate, right? It's not, hey, I just did this. It might only be twice a year. So I have to be strategic about those. But those are the pieces that I'm using that I have found the most success in this particular company. So I hope that helps.
It was a great question and a wonderful response. Let's find out for a newer program though, Claudia.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll echo everything Renee said. I think you really do have to think about where are the eyeballs of your internal customers, right? Your sales teams, or in my case, I sit under CS, so I also think of our customer success organization as very much my customers as well. You know, and really think about what are the communication norms within your company. As Renee just mentioned, you know, unique to Cloudflare, we have an all hands meeting every week at Cloudflare. It's very easy to get on that agenda. A lot of people within the company join. And so that's a great, you know, that was an easy one to get on there and just, again, build awareness, build visibility. Also things like sales kickoffs or sales quarterly meetings, et cetera. You know, as Renee mentioned too, I go a little grassroots as well. Given I focus primarily on the Americas, I have really great working relationships with our sales and customer success leads within these regions. And so quarterly, I will work with them on figuring out what's the best way to engage with your team and start strategically planning for which accounts will want to come through the executive briefing program this quarter, next quarter, 3 quarters, kind of whatever their planning cycle looks like for some of those larger accounts. And so again, making sure that the executive briefing program isn't thought of as some thing over on the side that will pull on because, you know, when we panic because we need to close the door on a deal, it's part of the account planning process from the get-go. And folks are thinking about how to strategically leverage it at what time and with the right players in the room. So I think that's critically important. And I will say, and I'd love to hear from folks either on this or at ABPM Spring Conference. I have yet to get to the point where I don't, you know, every day someone pings me and goes, oh, I didn't realize we had an executive briefing program, or I didn't realize you existed. This is great. You know, that's my goal, right? Is for everyone in the company to really understand who I am, what I help support, and make sure that our executive briefing program is known globally as a tool and as a program that they can leverage to the best of their ability. And I should add, I think a key part of that is getting in new hire orientation and making sure it's a key part of the sales enablement process, whether that's new hires or ongoing enablement with the sales team, as they are likely battered with lots of different ways to engage with their customers and prospects. And we want to make sure that this is well known as a key pillar of that.
I have
Renee.
one more piece, if I may. For one, yes, new hire training is fantastic, and thank you for bringing that up. But I also have a slightly silly but very effective way that I also did some grassroots work. When I had my first program, I had one center. I didn't have the whole program. I only had one center. And we locally would try to, this was before virtual was big. This was many years ago, but we wanted to try to market to those local sellers, of course, right? And you learn after a while what your cycles are, when you're going to have your dead spots in your cycle, which tends to be August, right? When a lot of people go on vacation, or January when people are just kind of starting up. So during those months, I would host as many local team meetings in my space as possible. And it was 2 things. One, you can have a nice space for your physical team meeting, but I would give you dessert, right? Like I would get a brownie tray or something inexpensive, but it would entice people to host their meeting in our space. And in return, I would get 15 minutes on their agenda to talk about any updates that we had done or anything like that. And what I would find every single time was right after that, September would be slammed because we would remind people of our presence. Because it wasn't just that we were new or just opening, it was just reminding people that we were there. And oh yeah, I do want to do that. Oh yeah, that is going to help. Oh, that helped me so much last year. I want to do it again. So that using that cycle to your advantage, and food always helps, I found very successful.
Free food always helps, Renee. That's
yes.
Definitely.
Moral of the lesson: sugar sells. Renee,
do
do we have
have
any
a-
other questions?
Yeah, we have another one or two of them. How do you welcome or onboard new executives to ensure their support of the briefing program?
Renee, do you want to kick that off or?
So you just had one. If you want to start that, it's up to you.
Yeah, I'll admit I don't have a ton of experience there. We haven't had a ton of leadership turnover in the last 2 years I've been working, fortunately. But I will say we did have a new head of revenue join our organization about 4 or 5 months ago. I can't do the math. But I think that to the question, a key part was getting on his agenda, right? As he was thinking about his discovery sessions, working with the teams to really collect information about how our organization was run, what was important as he was building out his key pillars. I wanted to make sure I was at least 30 minutes on his calendar to introduce myself and talk to him about what our executive briefing program does. One of the nice things is he'd come from an organization that had an executive briefing program, an executive briefing center. So the education I didn't have to educate as much. But I did have to educate on what does executive briefing mean to Cloudflare, right? We're new, we're still growing. It's what we have is unique to what other organizations have based on our maturity and who we are as a company. And so it was really about highlighting what we've done internally as key successes, how I think about growing that forward, but also how he really envisioned what the future of his organization looked like and how I would fit into that. So letting that be both an education on who you are, what you do, but then allowing for feedback as well, right? Of what had worked well for him in the past. And I think this is any leader, right? What had worked well for them in the past in terms of involvement in executive briefings, how they thought about their time, what was priorities to them in terms of their day-to-day or their team's day-to-day, as you think about their teams as discussion leaders. And so just making sure that you're building that rapport from day one or as close to day one as possible is really important.
Good points. Renee, want to answer?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think I've not had to, I'm the new one, so I guess I kind of had to onboard everybody in that way, right? Of educating what a program is and all of that, learning what it could be for Crestron specifically, because every program is unique. But I've also had a lot of experience in, for better or for worse, being bought out and having to, whether it be a new leader or new leadership overall, and having to educate them on the existing program. Do they also have another program? Are we the same? Are we different? And kind of being in that seat. I have found that doing so whenever possible, especially in that circumstance, because it's pretty extreme, in person, finding out when that leader was going to be at one of the sites and making sure that I was there too, was helpful to be able to walk through and not just talk about numbers in the program, but walk through and talk about what that experience is for a customer, if possible. But it's getting time on calendar and it's talking through what these programs really are. What I do for a living is probably the most common conversation that I have had in my 16 years of being a briefing professional. We were joking earlier that it is a conversation I have with my family as well, because they're still not entirely sure what I do. But our leaders need to know that. And so that piece is perhaps the most important.
Yeah. And I one thing I'll add too, and one, it recently took me a 45-minute car ride with my dad to make him finally understand what I do. So it takes some time. But I think another key part of all of this too, is you think about your leadership team, they're hit by a lot of different priorities. I would think a lot about how do you engage with their admins, so their assistants, they're going to be key players and stakeholders in getting their involvement. But then two, also try to work with them to identify who's their right-hand man or woman within the organization, right? You're not always going to get on your CEO, CTO's calendar. Their calendars are crazy. But work with their kind of trusted advisors within their own organization to know what are their priorities, how are they thinking about, what's important for them, right? So as you're building that trust and transparency, you can get the behind the scenes look to then be able to speak their language. I think that's a critical part of all this too.
And maybe the next step is you invite them to give the overview of the company or whatever when they're ready, get them in the center and getting them involved. We've had a great
Absolutely.
conversation. I know that I've been taking notes because I've been learning some great new ideas. I want to thank you both for sharing the insights and your wisdom. But in closing, I have one more question for you. It's 3 years from today, and Allie's contacted us, and we're having another UPLEVEL panel. And here we are again 3 years from now. What's different about your program then than compared to today? And Claudia, do you go first, please?
Sure. Well, I hope a lot. I think a big thing for me, right, is I think I feel very much still like a little startup within our executive briefing program, and I want to mature. And so I think a lot of that is the financial resources behind that, personnel, tools, as well as global presence. And so really establishing ourselves as a global brand, as a global facilities that our sales and customer success and leadership can use is really, really, really key. And where I think, it's hard for me to think 3 years. That's longer than I've even been in the executive briefing world at this point. But I think that's kind of my North Star for me, right? Is I really do think a lot about what my year-long plan looks like for 2023. What are the concrete steps that I can do to get to kind of my yearly goal, which is growth across both volume, across with the kinds of accounts I service, across the overall kind of content and marketing and customer experience that we're bringing to our customers, as well as the ability to kind of replicate me or build a team that can help support that.
Thank you, Claudia. Renee, 3 years from today.
I think as much as I would have a 3-year plan, my big plan is 5-year, because I have a lot of work to do. And I know it doesn't necessarily happen as quickly as I would like, but, be it 3 or more, I can say today that I am a global program in that I am trying to expand globally as best as possible, and I'm able to provide virtually as best as possible, as Claudia has mentioned as well. But my very small team, East Coast based, cannot be everywhere and in every time zone. So equal to Claudia, being able to really provide continuity of service regardless of time zone is one massive goal that will take me some time, because I've got to take on sites, I've got to uplift, I've got to onboard culturally, as well as physically some of those locations, and then also staff and have the ability and funding to be able to staff globally. But also being able to take the visual and programmatic vocabulary that I'm creating in New York and New Jersey and Boston and expand that into these other locations globally as well. That's a huge lofty goal that's going to take some time. So I think that 3 years from now, I hope that 3 years from now, there is a foothold, but 5 years from now is where I really see that success, or really hope that I'll have that benchmark of success for those things, so that I could look at the program and say, okay, that's done, check. Do we start over again and start to uplift, because you're always uplifting? Do we expand further? Where are those next steps? That's kind of my 3 to 5 year plan, I guess. Yeah.
Could you give us the elevator pitch on your presentation at ABPM at the end of the month?
Absolutely. ABPM members are amazing storytellers. We are trained in a variety of ways to manage a briefing, a conversation with a customer, and tell these spectacular stories about our company. We perhaps don't do that in the same way when we're talking about our metrics to our leaders. So the goal of my presentation is to really talk about how we can talk about data through storytelling, how we manage those conversations based on the eyeballs or the ears that we have to have those conversations with throughout the company. And I think it'll be a lot of fun. I hope so anyway.
Sounds great. So
Thank you.
those of you who are listening to a recording later, I just want to invite you to look for these folks. I know I'll be there. Well, all 4 of us will be at the briefing or ABPM, and we can answer any questions that may come up that you have that when you listen to this conversation. I personally want to extend a thank you to the audience for your questions today. And what a privilege it's been for me to work with Claudia and Renee, and of course, Allie. So thank you very much. It's really, I think UPLEVEL is a very important tool for our profession. And I know it's helping a lot of us grow.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen, too.
So that does wrap up our webinar. I wanted to say thank you to all three of you, Ellen, Renee, and Claudia. It was a pleasure to have you on this panel. And then we know that your time is precious, and I am immensely grateful that you're able to carve out some time to be with us today. So, and for everybody who joined us, we appreciate you being here. We hope you guys gained some insight and learned from the thought leaders here on today's panel. So please be on the lookout. We do have another webinar coming up in May. It's going to be on getting the most from speakers through management, recruiting, and motivating. That will be co-hosted by Naomi Price, who's on this call today as a guest, and she's from Vantage Partners. So that will be on May 4th, Thursday, May 4th. So we hope to see you guys there. And until then, have a wonderful day.
Thank
Until
you.
then, we'll probably
Thanks,
see everyone.
guys.
Bye.
See you soon.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.